Today I'm going to be looking at an MSI Z390-A Pro motherboard. So let's get the box open and see what we're dealing with. So it is just the board by the looks of it, there's no accessories included. The I/O shield's also not included, which is a bit of a shame, but it didn't specify either way what was included, so it's always best to assume that things will be missing if it's not explicitly stated that it's included. The CPU socket's just been left flapping around in shipping, that's a bit strange. And I can see just opening this up now there is some damage to the pins in the processor socket. That probably wouldn't have happened during shipping, but yeah, it's a bit strange to leave that open. There's a bit of dirt or something on the RAM socket which I'll clean off. It's not going to affect anything, but now there's no point trying to boot the board given the damage to the CPU socket. So let's just take a closer look and see what those pins look like. Right, so I've just grabbed my phone so that I can use the torch just to get a bit of a better look at what's going on here. Yeah, you can see there's some bent pins there along towards the bottom, and it looks like this whole inner edge as well is pretty much all of them look as if they're. To try and bend these pins back, I'm going to be using a pair of very fine-tipped anti-static tweezers. So what I'm going to do first of all, if you open these out and just use the one half of them, that allows you to get a really fine tip which you can use to just push underneath the pins, which I find is an easier way of trying to get these up, because it can be quite tricky, especially when multiple rows of pins end up kind of squashed on top of one another. I'm going to have to be quite careful while doing this, because if you do this a bit too hard, you can end up actually snapping the pins off, and if you snap the pins off and it's an important pin, then you end up needing a whole new socket, which I definitely want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So I'll go ahead and try and put all these pins roughly back into position, and we'll see the result at the end. So I think it looks pretty good now. I mean, it's never going to be completely perfect, but when the CPU is actually inserted, it does squeeze down on the pins a little bit, so they don't have to be perfect, just as long as they're roughly in the right position, that they'll make contact with the correct pad on the CPU. For testing, I've got an XFX TS430 power supply, an i5 9600K CPU, and a single 4GB stick of RAM. I also have a cooler for the CPU, which is obviously going to need to be fitted, but I'm not going to bother installing this fully. I'm just going to sit this on top of the CPU as it is, using the existing thermal paste, which for testing purposes will be more than good enough. So it's time to get it all installed. Before I try turning this on, I'm just going to short these two pins here next to the battery, and that's just going to reset the BIOS settings back to the defaults, just in case there's any incompatible settings there that would stop it turning on. As the power button's not plugged in, we've just got to short the two pins together to get it to turn on. Well, that was a bit of an anticlimax. It looks like it's still not happy with something. We do have an LED lit up here, which is labelled boot. So it's got past the CPU error. No, it's just switched itself off. Now I did reset the BIOS before doing this, so potentially it might just need another power cycle to actually confirm the new settings. You know, sometimes when you reboot it'll come up a screen telling you that the settings have changed and you have to press a key to boot. So let's just give it a go rebooting it and see if it'll do it the second time around. No, looks like we're still not getting anything. It's actually just turned back on by itself. I'm not sure if that's a good sign or not, but let's see what we get this time. See, I didn't actually connect a boot device because I was just planning to go straight into the BIOS. I'm wondering whether you need to have a device attached before it'll even let you get that far. Because at the minute, the BIOS code that it's giving us on the board is the one that's labelled boot. So it does seem to get past the CPU check, which is promising. So hopefully if I try attaching a boot device we might get a different result. At least that's what I'm hoping for. Yes, there we go. We've got life. Booting into Windows now, so that's great news. Now I'm going to need to run some stress testing on this, and I'll fill all the RAM slots, put a graphics card in, but it's looking like it might be fixed now. It was just those CPU pins that were the problem. Now I do need to do a lot more testing on this just to make sure things like all the RAM slots are working, the PCI Express slot and all of the outputs, but yeah, it's looking promising. I just wanted to add this little update in to say that I did a lot more testing on the board with graphics cards, more RAM, a different CPU, and it looks like everything is actually working perfectly now. And I have already managed to sell this board as well. It does make it a bit easier when there's something you can visually see wrong. That's not to say there couldn't have been other issues, and the pins could have shorted in the CPU socket, which could have caused damage elsewhere in the board. So it was never a guaranteed fix, but it is always nice when you first open something and you can visually see something wrong that you know you've got to sort that out, and that could be the only problem. And luckily, that turned out to be the case here. So I hope you liked this video, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll stick around for the next one.